Welcome to the Philosopher's Compass podcast, where I talk about practical philosophy with my guests, and we focus on how philosophy can help us live more meaningful and more purposeful lives. I'm your host, Meredith Alexander Coons, and I am the writer behind the Stoic Mom, which is on Substack now, and that's something I've been writing since 2016. And I'm also a co-author of the book Beyond Stoicism, and it's called Live Like a Philosopher in the UK and Europe. So I'm really excited to have as a guest today Leonidas Konstantakos, who is an international relations theorist specializing in Stoicism and just war theory. He teaches in both the philosophy and international relations departments at Florida International University and in the philosophy department at Miami Dade College. He also teaches ancient civilizations and debate at Archimedean Schools. He's co-author of Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living In, and is currently working on a new book on Stoicism and justice in conflict. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And we met recently at StoiCon, which is this great annual event. If any listeners don't know about it, I'd encourage you to check it out. Every year, Modern Stoicism, the organization, puts on this online conference, and people from all over the world join and try to learn about Stoicism. And then after that, you can also join Stoic Week, which just happened as well, where you can kind of live like a Stoic for a week with really interesting prompts and educational background. But yeah, so and we were on the same panel to talk about sort of the practical implications. And I heard Leonidas speak, and I thought this is so interesting. He has a great perspective on philosophy, on history, on living life. And so I just wanted to chat with him and learn from him. So I was curious about, when did you first become interested in Stoicism?
Meredith, I think I first got interested in philosophy generally as a kid, as I was reading the early dialogues of Plato. And I think I got interested in Stoicism mostly when I started rereading these things after my 2 tours in Iraq. I started reading Socrates again, and the early dialogues of Plato and Socrates, and I saw Socrates in a different light than I did before. I never really understood much of it as a kid, of course, but when I looked at it again, I saw Socrates something like a disgruntled army veteran, right? I mean,
Yes.
right? His city just lost a 27-year-long war against the Spartans, right? And well, what's happening? He's asking questions, right? Why did we lose? What's wrong with the things that we value? What's wrong with the things that we teach our children? And why did we lose to these half-hick stiffs, the Spartans, right? Especially, I mean, look, if you lose to the Spartans after 27 years, I mean, you're still the second most toughest military in the world, right? But it was interesting. We have an empire, you could say. We have a democracy. What happened? So I think that what fascinated me is you have this old army veteran. I mean, fought in at least 3 battles, right? Potidea, Delium, Amphipolis. And he's walking around asking people questions like, you're sending us to war, what for justice? Well, what is justice? And it turns out they don't know the answer, right? So that's what
Yes.
fascinated with me. And as I got
Yeah.
more into it, I realized that Stoicism was just that offshoot of Socratic philosophy that tried to look at, rather than just say the word justice and say the word virtue. Well, what did that mean for someone that has to live in a new world where the city-state doesn't make sense anymore, where you're not in control of what your city is going to do, of what your world is going to do, and how do we get through that? How do we be just and brave in this kind of world? And I think that's what turned me on to philosophy the most. And if we're going to be honest, I mean, just having to deal with my own experiences after the war, and how do I relate to a world in which I have to define myself as something other than a soldier, and how do I get through the worst experiences the memories of the worst experiences of my life? And Stoicism did for me what no amount of anything else or therapy or working out in the gym could possibly do. Right?
That's really remarkable. Yeah. So first of all, it's amazing what you've done as a veteran. I applaud you, and I think that it'd be very interesting to hear a little bit more about how kind of that experience led you back towards philosophy just a little bit more. Were there things about Stoicism that particularly appealed to you or helped you, or Socrates itself, that story you told about him being a disgruntled veteran, which I think is very, very true when you stop and think about it, but most people don't think about him that way.
Well, first let me say, what I used to think was amazing, now I understand You write about being a Stoic mom, and I think what you do is amazing because I'm a stepdad now, right? To two
Oh,
teenagers.
yes. Yes.
And I gotta tell you, I thought the army was hard, the war was hard. Like, I think what you're doing is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. It's a tough call of duty, I guess, to be a parent.
Yes, yes, yes. But yeah, I find it fascinating that you had the Stoics who like Socrates were living in Athens a little later, and the way I see it, maybe again because of my upbringing or whatever, but I saw these guys as working class immigrant philosophers. What we would now call working class immigrant philosophers. That they weren't citizens to be able to buy a garden like Epicurus. They weren't they
Yeah.
didn't have an attendant slave like to go to Aristotle's school, right? These are just working class guys that are sitting around in the public porches discussing, okay, what does citizenship mean in a world where we can't
Yeah.
partake in politics? In a world where it doesn't even matter because Alexander the Great's uh, descendants, basically, in politics, are going to do whatever they want to do anyways, right? So
Yeah.
be able to redefine your life and understand that it is being a citizen of the cosmos that's more important than being a member of any particular small community really
Mhm.
stuck out to me.
Yeah. Yeah. You're raising good points from history that I think most readers of ancient philosophy today or Stoicism today don't really consider is that it's true that these Stoic philosophers were kind of outsiders in their own day when they went to Athens or when they were teaching also in Rome and then being exiled from Rome. And in fact, some being in slavery. And could you expand on that a little bit more about how you think that shaped their philosophy?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. I mean, these guys are coming in. I mean, all these guys were foreigners, right? Zeno maybe wasn't even Greek. He was at least partly Phoenician, right? They called him the
Yeah.
Phoenician, and
Right.
he's a failed merchant, right? So
Yeah.
there is a sense which he's something of a merchant at heart, in the sense that his philosophy, he's saying this is important enough for you to buy, basically. You need to buy my
Yeah.
philosophy, right?
Kind of selling his ideas.
His, and Cleanthes, right, the second head of the school, he was a laborer at night, right? He had to
Mm,
carry water out of a well, and he had
mm,
to water people's gardens at night, which is, I mean, the days before irrigation, this is very hard work, right? So just so he
yeah.
could attend philosophy lectures during the day, and he's writing on pottery shards, he's writing on cattle bones because he can't afford paper. And
Oh my gosh.
Chrysippus, he is a long distance runner. I think that who they are influenced so much in their philosophy that we don't really think about. I mean, look at Cleanthes. He may have had some kind of brain damage from those days
Mm,
before they wore boxing gloves, right? So
right.
it's
Right.
very difficult for him to understand something, but once he's got it, he is trained, right? He has that muscle memory
Mm,
to internalize it. Chrysippus is a
mhm.
long distance runner. He plays a long game, right? He
Yeah.
talks about running in his metaphors, right? Like in justice, it's not okay to trip the other person. You got to run on the finish line. It's not okay to trip the other person. Who they were as people, I think, influenced their philosophy very much. Now, this isn't philosophy. This is history of philosophy, but I think it tells us so much more when we can incorporate who these people were into their philosophy, right?
I totally agree with you. As a sort of former historian myself, who still is a historian at heart, I think we can't separate the two. We can't say, oh, these people just lived, as brains in a vat somewhere. They were actually in their time and place. Yeah, being an Athenian citizen, right, was a really big deal. That was not something you could just say, oh, I really want to sign up for your Athenian citizenship
Right.
now. Let me in. That wasn't how it worked, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, look at in terms of their jobs, you have Sphärus, who was an educator at heart, right? I mean, whether or not he agrees so much with Chrysippus kind of made the school what it was, but
Yeah.
Sphärus left. I mean, he said, like, I'm going to go down to Sparta and I'm going to bring philosophy there. I'm going to educate the young elite class that can afford philosophy courses there. I mean, he ended up teaching the king of Sparta, who ends up incorporating Stoicism into his political reforms. I mean, this is fascinating that they actually had lives that, like us, if we're taught, like your podcast about practical philosophy, I mean, these guys
Yeah.
live practical philosophy, right?
Yes, yes. And this is part of the reason why I started this podcast because when I was going to school, philosophy was this very abstract thing. It was very removed from reality. It was about, parsing language or certain types of logic. Not that that's bad, it's just it was not part of my daily life or my way of thinking, and
Mm.
it felt very kind of separate from decisions I would need to make in my life or how I wanted to be as a person. And then one thing that interested me about ancient philosophy is that many of them, and we wrote about this in our book, Beyond Stoicism, many of them are really practical. Some things are maybe a little more esoteric, like Neoplatonism or something, but a lot of it is really, how do I live? How do I live better? How do I live a good life? And not just how do I be happy, but how do I live a good
Right.
life? And I do think the time and place is very critical here too, because they were living in complete chaos. I mean, we think our time is bad, but like when we look back at what they had to deal with, it's pretty incredible. I'm not even to mention that, women didn't even have the right to do this. We did focus on a couple women in our book. Hipparchia is one of them, which I really love her in
Yeah.
particular, a cynic. But we're not going to go back in time. But we need today to think about philosophical practices that can actually help us think critically, and make better decisions and better choices. So that's
Yeah.
something I personally am dedicated to.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, so much we lose so much as well taking stoicism, like you said. I know we're not going back in time. I promise I won't talk too much about that. But it's hard not to. Something about
No,
the
no, I would love to hear more about going back in time. It's just I know we're not, we're living a different age,
yes,
but I
yes, we have
do
to
think the
plan on yeah,
history
exactly.
matters. It matters.
That's
And a
right.
lot of people don't care about history and then they miss a whole lot because
Exactly.
you're making some great points about like where they came from and the class they came from, the social class and the political class and the working class. Anyways, go ahead. Go ahead with what you were
No, no,
saying.
no. No, I was gonna say, like, I think it's interesting how, what we might consider like starts off as a low-class philosophy, like becomes like the philosophy of the Roman Empire, right? Um,
Yes.
and I think of it as like something like tango that we think it's so amazing. You learn it, and it's such a upper class thing. Yeah, it started as a low class dance. So something like
Hmm.
that is what I kind of relate to with Stoicism. It starts as something just got a bunch of guys talking. Okay, like we're all foreigners. Some of us are sitting around here, and we have to find how to live in this world. It's not till much later where the elites, now that they're speaking Greek, I mean, the Romans are still ruthless, but now they're destroying cities and reciting Greek poetry and philosophy while they're doing it, right? Like, so.
Yes.
So, so I think this is quite interesting, and we often concentrate on the greats, right? Musonius and Marcus and Epictetus and Seneca, but there's something to be lost when you don't see this early energy coming in with Cleanthes, Chrysippus, Ferris. And you're absolutely right that their time was chaotic. I mean, even in the Roman Empire, like we think our politics is crazy now here in the United States. Like
Yeah.
we don't have warlord generals just having a civil war inside the city of New York like they did inside Rome,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So it was
Yeah,
crazy.
no,
Exactly.
it's so crazy. And the history too also is part of what draws me to some of the ancient philosophies because I've always really found that whole the kind of swirl of sort of humanism and history and ideas and from that time it's just particularly there's something very very vivid and maybe it's because of the utter chaos they
Yeah.
lived in and like early attempts to put some logic and reason to how we should live as opposed to just give in to warlords and stuff. Yeah, that's so interesting. So part of the problem I think is that we don't have a lot from those
Mm,
early sources in Stoicism, the Greek sources of
sure.
Stoicism. You're way more knowledge about this than I am. So I mean, how do you piece together what these folks even thought or
Well, me personally, how I piece it together is I was very lucky during my PhD dissertation in that my advisors, for better or worse, they let me do because I was motivated in this. They let me do whatever I want.
yeah.
Like, okay, read whatever you
Oh,
want, put it together. And I read,
very cool.
yeah, I read not just the philosophy of international relations in general, but I looked at the time period that these guys were living. And I mean, there's so much that we don't focus on in Stoicism. Like students of Zeno, for example, Xenophon, he's starting a war against Macedon, right? He's a Stoic philosopher, the last great fight against Macedon before the Athens were like, okay, well, we know there's nothing we can do. We have to reinvent ourselves as a college town because this whole going to war against Macedon is not working, right? But you had a Stoic philosopher that's saying like we need to do something not just personal for our lives. It's not so much later in Stoicism where you start saying, okay, how do I live in this life and be a good person doing it? The early Stoics like Simonides, Ferris, who went down to Sparta and reformed Sparta and fought against Macedon as well. You had Blasius, who was able to try try to get the Gracchi brothers and help them Gracchi
Mm.
brothers make a reform in Rome. So the way I looked at it is not just look at the philosophy itself, not what the extant sources are telling us, which isn't much from the early Stoics, but also what the historians are telling us, that what was the zeitgeist of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and you can piece together stories of the early Stoics and their followers we learn more from just reading what little bit remains that someone else wrote about that's found in some papyrus, that we learn more from the
Yes.
social from the social aspect of the philosophy there, I think.
Yes, that's fascinating to me, and I think that is what history is. You have to piece it together. I think it has been somewhat missing or hard to find, I think, in modern Stoicism because there's just yeah, people struggle with the lack of sources, but I think you're really onto something there.
Well, sorry, I want to be clear in that I'm very lucky in the sense that I'm not an historian, but as an international relations theorist, I can look at the history. I can say, okay, what was the anarchic structure of the system at the time, or whatever, and I can use that for philosophy. I'm not like someone in your field of history. I don't have to be rigid. Like, is this exactly what Cassius Dio was saying? I'm very lucky that I can take this. Okay, what does this mean for Stoic philosophy? What does this mean for international politics? So I can be a little more free in abstracting some of these things that as historian, even though I love history, I admire history and historians very much, I think I'm very lucky that I'm a little bit more free because of like this overlap between the history of Stoicism and international relations and Stoic philosophy, right?
That's a great sort of intersection to be at and to be able to draw upon all of those. Well, given how much you have had chance to study the history, which historical Stoics or other ancient people do you admire? Do any of them inspire you today?
Sure. My two great loves, of course, apart from my wife, of course, but are Sparta and the Stoics, right?
Mhm.
One biologically, like my family on my father's side is from Sparta, and intellectually the Stoics. So I feel like these two great loves of my life, and the Stoics themselves admired the Spartans in many respects, right? I mean, many of the ancient philosophers did. That's not particular to Stoics, but they're able to incorporate so many stories, like Epictetus saying that we do what we think is reasonable. Like being whipped, for example, is not something we avoid in itself. We avoid it when we think it's unreasonable. Go down to Sparta
Mm.
and see how the boys are whipped to within an inch of their life there as just training, right? And they get recruited and they do it as an honor to be whipped in front of everybody, in front of a bunch of streaming tourists, right? So they admired the Spartans very much, and the Spartans admired the Stoics in their reforms. Like I said, you have Sparus
Mm.
coming down, and Cleomenes, who was a Spartan king, but also trained in Stoic philosophy. I would go further than a historian and say that he was a Stoic because Plutarch throws that in like twice or three times to make a point. So I think that someone like Sparus, someone like Cleomenes are able to show how this intersection between Sparta and Stoicism and how we can use that not just for our own lives, but to better our communities to the extent we can, I think is really important.
Yeah, yeah. That is actually very inspiring. I mean, people often think about Spartans and they think about, oh, they're just this very kind of warlike, hardened folks from the movie 300.
Right.
but but there's a lot more to it than that. And is there anything specific you'd like to say about Spartans that really interests you?
Sure. And again, what a historian like you would remind me, of course, is that there's a Spartan mirage that the Spartans never really wrote anything down themselves, but other people are kind of incorporating what they think is great and writing and saying, oh, because the Spartans did this, that's why it's great. But I will say that when it comes to Spartans generally, is that yeah, they were a warrior culture, but I mean, it's not like they were at a 10 in warfare and everybody else was at a 1. It was ancient
Hmm.
Greece. They were at a 10, and Corinth was maybe a 9. Athens was a 9. Some people were 8s. Like they were just a little bit more than everybody else. It was in an anarchic structure. You're insecure about your neighbors. And the Spartans were
Right.
just really good at saying, okay, we have to train all the time. Um, we have to be a little bit stronger and better than everybody else, or else we're going to lose our way of life. I think that that is fascinating itself. But they weren't just a warrior culture for its own sake. They were meant to make
Hmm.
good citizens, right? That was the point.
Hmm.
You don't have to go all the way to Sparta to be in a warrior society. The Celts were every bit as fierce, the Thracians, right? So the Spartan system, the agoge, the education system, and as educators, of course, like this is something we want to admire and evaluate, is not just being a warrior for its own sake, but being an excellent citizen. How do I become a good citizen? Did they do it right in all respects? Absolutely not. But that's why a Spheres thought it was important to go down there and say, look, like every philosopher thinks you guys are doing something amazing. But one, you guys have fallen from that ideal, one. And second of all, like when we talk about what is honor, what is courage, and what is justice, there's the Spartan way, but then there's a philosophical way, right, about what is justice. Justice as not as doing what is right for your community, but what is doing right as a cosmic citizen. There is that justice as a character trait, which I think that the Stoics would have taken from Sparta. And now even we know much more. What we think we know about Sparta has been incorporated because of, or has been embellished, as it were, because of the Stoic philosophers writing about it. So many Stoics wrote about Sparta, the Constitution of Sparta, the Lawgiver of Sparta. So there's a lot of overlap here. And I think it's people like Spheres that are able to say, this is what we admire about Sparta. And we don't have to become warriors to be just and brave people. I mean, in an utopian philosophical treatise, they would say, weapons are useless. Well, that's not Spartan, right? So,
Right.
There is overlap, but what I love about the Stoics is that this is for everybody, not just for a warrior culture, right?
Absolutely. One more question I need to ask you about Sparta, if you know this. I've read that women had maybe a stronger role to play in Sparta than in other areas of Greece at the time. Do you mind me asking about that? As someone who's interested in women's history, what would you say about the role of women in Sparta?
Right. Again, because you're an historian, I want to be very careful, and I want to go further than the sources. But
well, I'm not a professional historian. I kind of am an erstwhile historian at this point.
But yeah, women have traditionally played a strong role in Sparta, right? I mean, if you compare it to Athens, at Athens, you were 14 years old, you got married to some guy maybe twice your age. I mean, even the philosophers like Socrates, he's probably 30 to 40 years older than his wife, Xanthippe, right? Whereas, and we have to think about this dynamic, right? But in Sparta, it was different. Sparta, marriage was different. Men were always gone. I mean, you were required to have dinner every night with your platoon, basically. So women had to run the show, right? So of course they had more of a say in the happenings of the city, because they're the ones that are there. They're the ones that have to put that backbone into their men, right? They have to be able to. They know more about what's going on in the house and in the city than the men do. The men are off in their tents, or they're out hunting, or they're out drilling, right? So women were played a bigger role. And when you want to put some courage into a Spartan, like, you have the women there that have to keep this the Spartan mentality sharp. I mean, for example, we have so many sayings when Spartans are, and then they have to come home to their wives and their mothers are like, "What are you doing? Your sword. Oh, you say your sword's too short? Okay, take a step forward then." Right?
Get together.
Exactly. Come back with your shield, or come back dead on your shield, right?
Right.
So they were tough. Spartan women were tough. And I think that the Stoics would have admired this view that if Zeno's right, that in a perfect utopian world of sages, people would all wear men and women would wear the same clothing. Institutions would be different. Or no clothing at all, whatever. But the point is that there was no fundamental difference, like Aristotle thought, between what the women's roles and men's roles, things like this.
Yeah, no, you're giving me more ideas for more things to read and think about, because I think it's fascinating.
Awesome.
And would you say that you learned a lot from your study? Because I know you wrote a dissertation on just war theory and philosophy and Stoicism, if I'm getting that right. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you focused on and how you think that the Stoics thought about war or just war.
If we're being, if we go into the Stoic axiology, right, with the study of value, war isn't indifferent, right? And in ancient Greece, it would have been ubiquitous. Wars happen all over the place, and it's hard for us to imagine. Like, I live in Miami, right? I can't imagine thinking, oh yeah, in a couple months, probably Naples is going to attack, right? Or we might have to be at war with Fort Lauderdale, right? Like, we have to be ready for that. Like, we don't think about that, right? The ancient Greeks thought about that all the time, right? That leads to the city-state system, the polis system, leads to a lot of competition, a lot of creativity, right? I mean, you have Athens as a democracy, Sparta as an oligarchic warrior society, a lot of creativity, but it's a lot of insecurity, right? Because
Hmm.
your world could be turned upside down with the next burning of the fields from the next city over that's coming to take your farmland, right?
Yeah.
So I think that their world was different in that sense. War not only was indifferent, but it was also ubiquitous. But I think that we often see justice today, or the just war theory, we see as rules that
Hmm.
we are to abide by in order to have if wars are going to happen, these are what we shouldn't do. I'm not trying to take that away from us. Okay, those rules are important. Those
Hmm.
rules are there. We should keep looking at them and keep updating them. But the
Hmm.
Stoics see justice a different way, right? As you know, for Stoics, justice is a character trait. Justice is uh, what is an aspect of a soul that is this well-tempered soul in accordance with nature that's able to act with knowledge at all times. And sometimes that looks like justice. Sometimes it looks like primarily bravery. Sometimes it looks like self-control. But in terms of justice, the Stoic is the person that can be in conflict. That can be in worst cases, a conflict in a war, and say, okay, I don't control what other people do. I don't control the orders my government gives, but I do control my judgments, my beliefs, my desires and intentions. Those are up to me. That's what really makes me me. And I can at least try to be a just person in a world where justice it's not an institution. Justice isn't out there. Justice is in here,
Mm.
right? Just something we do.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I think that's the way the Stoics would have looked at it. And that was what my dissertation was about. When we say just war, there's never been a just war. Yeah, maybe not. But the point is, if someone, at least hypothetically, is a sage, if the Socrateses and Diogenes among us are in a war, like Socrates was, you can still be just yourself, even when justice is not
Hmm.
in can't be something out there because it's an external and
Hmm.
or it's not it's justice internal and everything else external. But you can be just in an unjust world, and that's what my project was about.
How does that relate to kind of your experience as someone who served in the military itself, where I know there's a whole chain of command and people are telling you this is your orders. What would you say about kind of the real life application of what you're sharing?
Right. So first, let me say that I like the Army. I loved being a soldier, and I'm proud of being a soldier in the U.S. Army. I was less
Hmm.
proud of the foreign policy that sent me to Iraq in the first place. Right. I'm less proud of. But I did 2 tours, and
Hmm.
in my second tour, I was a sergeant. So I felt that I had to go because I had soldiers that were looked up to me as an example. Whatever
Yeah.
I might have thought about the war, like my job was to be a sergeant in the Army, and I tried to play that role well to the extent that I could. What
Hmm.
got me to leave the Army is, well, I got tired of being, people dumber than me telling me where to die, right? And also, I think that like you mentioned education at modern Stoicism and the importance of education. And I
Yeah.
remember writing what Epictetus was saying: only the educated are free. I was very lucky in
Yes.
the Army that I never learned how to play spades or dominoes. I was always reading, right? Reading Xenophon,
Mm.
who was there in Iraq, what we now call Iraq, 2,000 years before I was, and with his own challenges about being a soldier
Yeah.
in a war that he had no idea at some point what was going on. Leadership is all killed. What do we do now? And so instead of playing dominoes or whatever, I was reading Xenophon with a flashlight, right? So
Incredible.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So I took this to heart, and I thought, wow, this colored my experience. So when I came back and I left the
Mm.
military, I am one of those, like every other veteran, has to define their lives as something other than a soldier. And for me, it was
Yeah.
education, like you had mentioned in the
Hmm.
podcast the other day. It was that's something no one can ever take away from you, right? That is
Yes.
becomes part of your soul. Of all my regrets in life, I've never regretted getting an education. Right?
Yes. 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 Well said. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're framing some of the difficult quandaries that really we all face. I mean, and I think it's much more like stark. It's in the military, but it's true in a company. It's true in a
Sure.
nonprofit
Yeah.
organization. It's true anytime you're kind of
Absolutely.
working with other people. There's a constant like push and pull about you bringing your own virtues to it, but the others you're working with may or may not. And, this is part of why I love Marcus Aurelius. I love to read what he wrote about dealing with difficult people and dealing with
Sure.
people who are separated from their reason and who are really not in touch with, an ethical framework. And it's challenging,
Sure, and that was Marcus Aurelius, who could almost do whatever he wanted, right? I mean,
right?
if he had trouble dealing with people, imagine the rest of us, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I do like to think about that. I'm like, yeah, even someone with the ultimate power is coping with this. It's really remarkable.
It is remarkable. And Meredith, like you mentioned Marcus, and I think what's interesting is that, I mean, you get things that even he can't do. And one of those things I think we often can perhaps rightly criticize the Stoics that they never try to abolish slavery. At best, yet Seneca saying it. There's no reason you can't sit down with your slaves and have dinner every night. Yeah, right. Seneca's not sitting down with his slaves eating dinner every night.
Right.
He has slaves he's never met before on property he's never seen before. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but what you can do as Marcus is say, okay, I'm not going to abolish slavery. That'll be my last day as emperor because I'll get killed. But anytime there's a gray area, I can free a slave. And which he did,
Yes.
right? Anytime there was some kind of
Yeah.
gray area about whether the master would have wanted the slave to be freed at his death, he would free it, right? And even allowed him to own property, if he could do it. So in his, and it's weird to say in Marcus's microcosm, right? But when Marcus could be at court in those few times when he wasn't out there in the German frontier sleeping in a tent, he did what he could, to the extent that he could, right? Free a slave, take care of widows, take care of children, right? If it's true that he made gladiators fight with blunt swords, and I think that's something that he went, maybe an unpopular decision, but he did something that he felt was right. That why all the bloodshed? I've seen enough bloodshed on the German border, right? Why do it at home? This is inhuman, right?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Super interesting. Getting towards sort of a modern stoicism, what do you think that people get wrong about stoicism today?
I think that we often, and I know you mentioned before, and we've mentioned it in the book, also is that Stoicism is often seen as a life hack philosophy, right? That, wow, how can I get 3 more reps in the gym? How can I deal with this? Um, and I think that that's fundamentally individualistic. Maybe it says more about us than it does about the Stoics, because every 500 years or whatever that Stoicism comes back, it has to come back somewhere. The Neo-Stoics of they tried to put Christianity and Stoicism together, right? Like
Mm.
Justus Lipsius. So we kind of have our own challenges in the modern world. Like we seem, at least where I live, it's an individualistic philosophy, right? Or an individualistic lifestyle, and we try to make philosophy more individualistic. Like, this is how Stoicism is going to get me through my day today. I don't want to take that away from anybody, right? That's how I found Stoicism, dealing with my own problems, right? I don't want to take that away from anybody. But anyone, I think, that reads the Stoics for more than 6 minutes, then we'll see that this is fundamentally a social philosophy, right? As you know, Meredith, there's like 2 major aspects to this oikeosis, right? This the natural part of being a human. The naturalism of being a human is rationality and sociability, right? And both those things are important. Not just being able, how can I rationalize the fact that I didn't get this job, right? It's also
Mm.
like, what is my role as a human being? What is my role as a son, as a father? What is my role as a teacher, as a professor? And I think what often gets left behind is this sociability aspect. How do I become a
Mm.
better person? Like I said, I don't want to take that away from anybody. If it's using okay, you're still using Stoicism, go do it. But I think that it's baby Stoicism, right? When we start getting our black belt in Stoicism, it's if we start saying, okay, what would a Stoic saying about being a just person? What does that look like, right?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I think you're right that certainly it helps us day to day, but not in a sort of life hacky way to just, for example, make more money or get more fit or whatever it is. What about when you look at like modern stoicism today, what do you think people are getting right about it?
Yeah, first let me say that I think it's changing, right? I think the tide is
Mm.
turning. I mean, the modern Stoicism, just civic engagement, right? What is that?
Mhm.
What does Stoicism look like to someone that has to get along with other people and participate in the what we think happen to be crazy times in a society, which the Romans would have laughed at, right? But how now I think it's changing to senses, like at least as people get deeper into Stoicism, they start by reading whatever is on their feed or whatever. But as people start looking
Yes.
into it, it's like, okay, this is a philosophy about how what is my role in life? What are my roles? If we get deeper into it, we can say like the 4 roles of Panaetius or Cicero. But even if we don't want to get that deep, I mean, Epictetus himself talks about, well, remember, there's something that's right for you to do, but it has to be done in your circumstances. Who are you? Are you a town councilor? Are you a teacher? Are you a son? Are you young? Are you old? Right? And Epictetus mentions Socrates so many times. Well, let's look at Socrates' example. He gave up his life. He allowed himself to be executed when he could have ran away. Why? Well, he was also 70, right? I mean, we have to think about that, Meredith. He abandoned 3 children, right? About like 3 children and a wife, a young wife, because for his principles. Would it have been right for Socrates to do that at 30? Right? Would he have been right to take the poison at 30? We could have got 45 more years of philosophy from this guy. So remember that you are old. Remember that who you are, right? And that answer is not the same for everybody. Like we mentioned before, there you had Seneca and Thrasea, who were both Stoics and disagreed with each other about the right way to go about it, right? So there is a sense in which any Stoic has to say, all right, I have to do what is right. That's the cosmopolitan goal. But inside that cosmopolitan goal, there's something right for me, right? And I think,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I said, to add to your point, or to finish off your point, is that I think is changing slowly. And I don't want to, like we said, we don't want to take away, oh, here, read Marcus, you'll feel better. No, definitely read Marcus, right? But
Yes.
hopefully we progress to what the Stoics wanted us to progress to, right?
I do feel part of that is also because of the loss of the original Greek sources, where it's hard to kind of pin down for many people, including me, like how did they talk about the virtues? How did they talk about that ideal society where everyone could live together and be fully actualized, maybe, and live this flourishing life, right? So I think we have to reconstruct that somehow. And looking at Socrates, looking at these other philosophies, looking at Xenophon, others, is really one of the good ways to do that, in my opinion.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's also the case, like you mentioned what's extant. I mean, Chrysippus is said to have written hundreds of books, right? So if he wrote hundreds of books, we don't have any of them. Right? We don't have any of them.
Yeah, it's really sad. If only they had saved these throughout, antiquity or even in the Middle Ages, right? When a lot of things got written over with other texts and religious texts and stuff. And well, Seneca got saved because I think people felt he had a relationship with Christianity.
Sure.
And so it's kind of interesting when you see what we actually have from a historical perspective.
Yeah, what survives, what doesn't, and so much of it is like, well, the worm ate this book and not this book, right? So
right. So it's just luck. It's dumb luck at that point.
It's luck, and it's also, I mean, the Middle Stoics. By the time you get to the Middle Stoics, some of them are Bowdlerizing the ancient Stoics, right? Like, oh, Zeno said that, but he didn't mean it when he was talking about that cannibalism isn't bad. These Greeks, right? You know how the Greeks are, right? and it's a shame because I think when the early Stoics are saying something like, okay, there's no reason women and men can't wear the same clothes and do the same job, it often gets interpreted, and we know from later authors, like, oh yeah, Zeno believed in the community of wives. It's like, oh, was that the best way to interpret Zeno's writings?
Yeah, that's so true. You have this whole layers of interpretation.
Yeah.
Well, you're also, as you mentioned, you're an educator, you're a professor. How do you bring philosophy into your teaching and your research, and especially with the students? I'm really curious because as a parent, one of my kids, actually, she's in college right now. I have another kid who's in high school, and I try to bring a little philosophy into their lives. But for example, in high school, in a public school here in California, philosophy is not taught, and history is taught a bit, right? But only in certain ways and only certain aspects. And so I'd be curious about how you kind of bring philosophy to students in particular, maybe even what you hear from them about what their interests are, or what they think about philosophy and what they're learning.
Sure. So one thing I teach is I teach a class just on the Hellenistic philosophers. So I'm very lucky to be able to do that because one of my classes is just about, we start with the Cynics and the Epicureans and go on with the Stoics for 2 months. And then we finish off with the academic skeptics and their criticism of the Stoics, right? So that's a class
awesome.
Yeah, it's great. That's a class I dedicate just to Hellenistic philosophy. I'm very happy about that class. But even in my other classes,
maybe you could have signed my book.
Yeah, sign mine too. I should. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, of course.
Shameless plug, but it is. We do talk about those philosophies. But anyway, back to what
absolutely.
You're saying.
Yes, definitely. And besides that class, I teach intro classes and ethics classes, and in that the Stoics they get put in there, right? But there's so much we have there. It's like we teach so much. What gets taken out, right? Do I take out Aristotle, put in the Stoics? So when I can, I teach Stoics and those other classes. But there's so much about that has to come from the professor's own intuition, the professor's own example, right? And one of the things that I do, especially the last 4 years, I'm very lucky that I'm involved in what we Archimedean Schools, which is one of the best schools in the country. And what we do here, it has a program in philosophy from 5th grade to 12th grade. Philosophy
Oh.
is mandatory, right? Philosophy is mandatory every year starting from 5th grade. So in this curriculum, you get so much philosophy in general, and I also teach ancient civilizations there. So I spend so much time on the Greeks and the Romans, where I talk about the philosophies of the time as well, and mention some of these not just Stoic philosophers but Stoic heroes, right?
Mm, mm.
That we can, and as someone who's interested in history like you will understand, like you can learn so much about someone's life, right? To Tiberius Gracchus, how influenced by Stoicism was he? Were based on Stoic philosophy, considering he had the Stoic Blasius educating him. Someone who, after it failed in Rome, went to Pergamon and tried to make what we call the city of the sun there, where as a society of free and equal people, many of them former slaves. So we learn so much about their examples that I'm able to incorporate in teaching. So it's not, philosophy is important, absolutely, but so much of showing Stoic heroes that we don't think about, right? We learn about Cato, absolutely. I tell my students always about the Cato. They freak out about his death, right? As everyone should.
Right.
Everyone's too young to learn about his death, but we learn about the examples of themselves of Stoic heroes. I think that this is one way to incorporate it where it becomes alive. And I think, and because you're also interested in women's place in Stoicism, we have people who weren't Stoics themselves, but hanging around a bunch of Stoics that actually did things that were more Stoic than the men. For example, Seneca's nephew, he gets tortured to give up the conspiracy, and he rats
Right.
out everyone. He rats out his own mother, right? Whereas Epicurus, which is a freedwoman, probably never had a day of Stoic philosophy in her life. She gets tortured, handles it bravely, and then when they leave her alone, she hangs herself with her own bra, right? So
Wow.
she won't give up her fellow conspirators. I mean, that to me is more Stoic than this guy who's been a nephew of Seneca, sitting next to Seneca for 20 years or whatever, and didn't do his part, right?
Oh my gosh. I want to take your class. This is incredible. I had never even heard that story. That's so interesting. This is really great stuff. And role models. I mean, this is something that, Brittany Paulette and I had a session for Stoic Care that was focused on philosophical role models. And I actually talked about Hipparchia, Seneca, and I mentioned Hypatia too. These are people who, even if maybe we don't agree with, like, Neoplatonism, I'm not really sure I agree with the
Sure, of
philosophy,
course.
but I think the role models that some of these folks can show for how to live by what I would call the virtues is so inspiring. And I think we're in a day and age where we've kind of lost that. Like, most people, they look at others, or they look at celebrities and they look at what they can criticize or what they can, basically not admire.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of where our culture is, but it's really kind of fantastic to find some of these figures and say, here's what I really admire about this person, or here's how you can see the philosophy translate into their life, so that you can really see philosophy in action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of those things that people used to get wrong, that I think the tide is turning, and people like you and Brittany, amazing, also an amazing lady, are discussing, is that there's so much to be said just from a perspective that women didn't really get, or in a way women weren't able to say it in the days of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, right? I mean, anyway, it's important to remember in times like that the Stoics. I mean, Seneca is writing in many of his works. He's writing to women, right? Consolation of Helvia,
That's
Consolation of
true.
Marcia. He's writing. It's
Yes.
not the Stoics, not the Broics, right? We don't have to say, well,
Right. Right.
this is what virtue is. Well, is it though? Because you have Seneca. I mean, yes, he's writing for everybody. We know how Seneca works, but he is in his work. He's writing to Marcia and Helvia because he
Yes.
accepts that they also have rational souls, right? With more than other ancient philosophers said, and that they also can participate in the cosmopolis. They have just as every right to progress to sagehood as anybody else, and we get that from.
Hmm.
I think it's wonderful that we get that from even someone like Seneca, who we have has many flaws, like we all do, right?
Right. Right.
He's preaching poverty. He's the richest man in the Roman Empire. He maybe
Yeah.
started a war, right? The war in Britain, the Boudica revolt. Maybe that was
Mm.
part of his fault as well, because he may have called in all his debts at the same time, if that's true. But even someone like Seneca, with all his flaws, understands that, look, he's saying, hey man, I'm on the hospital bed next to you. Let me talk to this lady, right,
Exactly.
Marcia and Helvia, and see how, and tell them how my recovery is going, is basically what he's saying, right?
Yes, that's why I really love Seneca for this exact reason that you mentioned, and I turn back to him a lot, despite the flaws, or maybe because of the flaws, right?
Sure.
Because I'm not a perfect person at all, and there's a lot of things I wish I could change about myself. But the fact that we can still aspire to crawl towards virtue, as Seneca said.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And sometimes it's important to realize, I mean, of course we get it wrong. I mean, that's why Epictetus says, look, if you have a problem with anger, if you're not angry for 5 days, like make a sacrifice to Zeus, my friend, because you're on the right track, right? Seneca writes for Nero, right, on anger, the Ida. And there's one point in Seneca's life where he is actually bringing up charges against one of these delatores who's accusing him of corruption. And he goes too far with it. And Nero's like, hey, man, Seneca, calm down. Like Seneca's being is having to be calmed by Nero, right? So we get
It's a
it
really
wrong.
interesting moment right there. Yeah, I'll remember that. Yes. Have you integrated specific Stoic practices into your life? And are there any of those that stand out to you as really helpful?
Sure. So there's on my best behavior, I think of like what an education program would look like. And that was actually part of my dissertation too. How do we go with these 3 disciplines, right? What we might call the discipline of desire, the discipline of action, right? The discipline of assent, and try to systematize that. Like, do I
Mm,
want the right things? Am I behaving appropriately? And when I have time, think about, okay, how do I know that? I think that on my best behavior, I do that. But I think that day to day, I look at these specific Stoic practices, and I think the one that sticks out the most to me, at least these days, is the inner citadel. Marcus talks over and over again, like, look, all this chaos is going on around you. We don't control that. I mean, that's dichotomy of control. Step 1 is
yeah.
Stoicism, right? And that unfortunately, Meredith, that's sometimes where the Stoics stop, right? Or like where people today that read Stoicism,
Yes.
they stop. Dichotomy of control. But that's day 1 in Stoicism, right? Okay, learn what's in your control, what's not, and then go from there. And I appreciate someone like Marcus, the leader of the Roman Empire, right? Of the known world as far as he's concerned. And he can say, okay, look, there is an inner place where nothing can touch me, where if I practice and stop learning how to become a good person and just be one, and understand that in your soul to speak, right, in your very material soul, for the Stoics, you have
Right.
this fortress where you can still be an excellent, or you can still strive to be an excellent person, even in an unexcellent, a chaotic, anarchic world. And that is the one that sticks out most to me. Maybe it says more about my life than I mean to right now, but even in a chaotic world, I can still strive to have one little piece, these little corners of my mind, and everything inside of that is where I can have this inner fortress where I know that I can do what I can do my little part, which is what Stoic means part, right? I can be my little part of the whole, and I can make that excellent. I can try to make that excellent, even when I can't expect everything else to be. I think the inner citadel is underrated. I want to plant my flag and say the inner citadel is underrated. We need to look more at that.
And I think also there's a slight danger there where people might think inner citadel, okay, now I don't have to care about other people. But
Yeah.
that's not what it is at
Oh,
all.
you're absolutely
It's
right.
about building your own character from within and being able to be centered and grounded in that. But then you have to share it out, which of course Marcus did all the time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Meredith. So many times this is what we think of Stoicism, or Stoicism small s, is like a stiff upper lip
Mm,
philosophy. If we throw the word philosophy around like that, right? That
right.
things are suck, but we're gonna keep going at it, right? We often get that. And look, there's a place for that. Like in the early Stoics, between Cleanthes and Chrysippus, they had an argument about this. Whereas Cleanthes, he's like which he was a boxer, right? He's a boxing coach saying, look, man, nothing as bad is happening to you. Nothing bad is happening to you at all. You have to understand that. But is that for everybody? Whereas Chrysippus, a long distance runner, will have a different therapy. He'll say, look, whether or not this is actually bad, well, let's leave that aside for now. I'm not even going to touch that right now. You have to realize it's not appropriate for you to get angry. It's not appropriate for you to feel distress about this. So they have different therapies for this, right? Different ways to look at this. Whereas, like you said, it starts with the inner citadel. It doesn't stop there. The Stoics are not trying to take away our emotions from us. And that's often
Right.
the Stoics are emotionless. No. The point is not to be unfeeling as a statue, like Epictetus says. The point is to have these social relations. I mean, justice for the Stoics, is based on love. It's based on love for ourselves, for those in our circles, and goes on there. They're quite close, I think, to feminism on this point. You cannot take care and love out of justice and it still be justice. The Stoics understood that 2,000 years before. So it starts from the inner citadel. Absolutely. You're absolutely right in that we can't let it stop there, right?
Yeah, yeah. These are all, I mean, all of what you're saying resonates with me so much. Have you explored your own sense of your life's purpose and meaning through philosophy?
Yeah, that's a work in progress. I'm still trying to figure that one out. I don't know if if we're the same on this one, but I see you as an educator that's interested in history, and like that, I just from a young age, even before I knew it myself, people are like, "Yeah, you're going to be a teacher. Like you are going to explain things to people, right?" And even though I tried to fight that, I was like, "No, I'm going to be, I'm going to be a wrestler. No, I'm going to be in the army. No." And then it's like, "Yeah, I'll probably be a teacher." Right?
Hmm.
And yeah, what I'm trying to do, if I could bring Stoicism down to one sentence. Like people ask me, okay, we're in an elevator together. Tell me what Stoicism is about. And if I wish it were that
Yes.
simple, right? But if I could explain it to the person on the bar stool next to me, I would say the Stoics are telling us want whatever God wants. And if by God they meant
Mm.
nature, by God they meant destiny, want whatever God wants. So and live according to nature, but that also means your nature. And I've found myself saying, okay, I'll never be a great wrestler, especially not now in my 40s. I'll never be a great soldier. I've retired a long time ago. But you know what I can be? I can, what God or nature or destiny has put in front of me is to the extent that I can be, is to be an excellent teacher, or at least the best that I can be. And I think that if I have a purpose, I think that's what it is. But I'm trying to be like, Chrysippus's foot analogy. Hey, the foot has to be clean. The foot has to be taken care of. The foot has to be whole as a foot. But when you understand you're part of the whole, you have to want what's best for the whole. If that means being an educator today, then that's what that means. But sometimes, as we know, the foot has to get dirty, the foot has to get bloody, and the foot, sometimes for the good of the whole, has to be cut off. So I'm trying very much to find that purpose in education and expounding these, what I think to be important about Stoicism. But I'm trying very hard to want whatever God wants on this one. How about you, Meredith?
Mm.
Please tell me,
Yeah.
give me a
Oh
different
my
point of view,
gosh.
please. What do you think?
Yeah. No, no. I think that, I often think of Stoicism as doing the best you can in the situation you're in and just trying to live by the virtues, essentially. That's
Sure.
probably my elevator pitch, because I think we all have this false sense of like, oh, we can control everything around us. So that's, of course, going back to the dichotomy of control. And the other thing is, we kind of have to remember that the virtues can be just important guidelines for important kind of goalposts. Like in any situation you're in, and this is something that I've tried to teach to my kids as well. And I think that when I look at how they behave, I'm quite proud of them.
Nice.
And
Good.
I think also just bringing that kind of emotional intelligence, because that's the, as you said, the love and the compassion side of justice, and it's also being just to yourself. I mean,
Sure.
we are in a very harsh world, and there's a lot of self-criticism. I know I talked with my friends and colleagues all the time about how we're very self-critical, and then other people are critical of us, and then we're just, everything is critical. And so
Right.
somehow trying to grow that inner citadel, I really loved what you said about
Mm.
it, because I think that that's kind of the first step. Then you branch out from there. So I have lots of thoughts, but I'm also on a journey with the life's purpose, and that's part of why I love to talk to other people about it, because I
Sure.
think it's just so interesting, and that it's always a work in progress. I think I also have the natural teacher part of me,
Sure.
but I'm trying to kind of channel all of these things and then bring them out to people who might be interested, might learn something.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're doing it. So I agree. I mean, what you said about education resonated with me in that, yeah, we can't minimize that. The Stoics were nothing if not teachers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you mentioned, I mean, they all had role models. None of them thought they were sages, right? Which other philosophers did. Some other philosophers like, yeah, we're sages. And Epicureanism is relatively easy. Okay, stay away from pain, seek the right kind of pleasures, which is really the absence of pain. Live in your garden. Don't get involved in things that are going to stress you out, right? Don't
That's
don't
right.
steal because you might get caught. You never know if you're going to get caught. Don't freak out. Like the Stoics aren't like that. The Stoics valued education so much, and they expounded on that so much. You can't like care and like compassion that you mentioned. You can't take the education part out of Stoicism. Only the educated
Mhm.
are free, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, it's also about asking questions and critical thinking too. I think most of the Greek philosophies really, and the philosophies, the Socratic philosophies, right, that come out of that tradition. And this is more important than ever now. I mean, we have to think critically. We have all around us different influences that are trying to tell us how to think, tell us what to believe. So bringing that ability to use your own cognition, and as you said, the two sides, the rational and the thinking and the cognition, alongside the
Mm.
cosmopolitan, the community minded, the pro social side. I mean, this is why Stoicism, like when I really got that about Stoicism, that's when I truly locked in, as my kids would say.
Nice.
And do you think that there's anything you'd recommend to someone who's just starting out learning about Stoicism and ancient philosophy and history that they could read or listen
Mm.
to?
Yeah. So, what I usually, and this is probably terrible for my career, right? But I tell them like, this is the way I see it. Maybe my views have changed, are evolving on this one, but I gotta tell you, like, for me, I try to put the Stoics in their own time. So I tell them like, read the ancients, and of course, not everybody can. Not everybody has the time, the energy, the years of historical training to be able to take these things out of in the context. But I tell them, okay, certainly read Marcus, Epictetus, Seneca, but also, and my co-author would kill me if I don't also say that we wrote a book about this being better, Stoicism for a world worth living in, like your book as well, that teach practical aspects of philosophy, which you miss out on when you just look at the life hack Stoicism. But Meredith, what I think often enough is the way I see the Stoics is when I meet someone so often, they tell me, yes, I'm a Stoic. And I say, okay, awesome. I take the view of Epictetus or Socrates, and I'm not them on my best day, but who never called themselves philosophers. Like whenever someone would ask, hey, I want to meet a philosopher, Socrates would take them to someone else, right? Epictetus always says, if I were a philosopher, would I, what would my life be like? But which of course they were philosophers. So I try to see the Stoics as like, okay, I can't be a Stoic really any more than I can be a Roman legionary, right? Like I can march 20 miles, I could dig a ditch at the end of it, I could put on 60 pounds of armor, I could learn how to wield a sword, but I'm not a Roman legionary. It helps me to see Stoicism that way, right? I can admire so much about Stoicism, but I personally had to see the Stoics in their context. They were people from a certain time and place. Okay, to say now, oh yes, I'm a Stoic, is to me say, okay, I can sit next to Zeno and talk, and we know more. We know different things. We know more about the way the cosmos works. The average fifth grader knows more about the way the
Yeah.
cosmos works than the ancient Stoics. I think it's
Right.
important to take from the Stoics things that are going to help us, and on the same token, not be married to them, and say, this is Stoicism, and this is how you be a Stoic today. Also, it's so interesting to me to see the Stoics, who they were in their own time. So I would recommend looking at not just the philosophy, yes, read Seneca, read Marcus, but also who were Stoics that did things in their life? What did they do? What things were they struggling against? And so often from that, we will see so many things that we might find similar, right? I mean, a historian will say, no, the context was different. Well, that's why I'm not an historian, right? I can say they were dealing with wealth inequality, right? They were dealing with the
Yes.
problem of rights. They were dealing with the problem of oligarchy, right? I know that none of these things mean
Yes.
anything today, I'm sure, right? But when we see them in their own context and we read like examples from the history books about Stoics in action, look at Tiberius Gracchus, look at Blasius, look at King Cleomenes and the Spartan Reform, right? And we learn, I think, so much about Stoicism that you won't learn reading how Seneca's, thinking that a workout means riding being hoisted by his slaves through the streets of Rome because of the jostling, he's getting a workout, right? so we learn a lot about the history that we won't learn from Seneca, right?
Right. Oh, yes, of course. I'm so glad that you support learning about and reading about history, and also, of course, philosophy and everything else you've shared. I've loved this conversation so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, and I'm wishing you luck with all of your endeavors. I know you're working on writing and all kinds of and teaching. Yeah, awesome.
Same here. It was a pleasure to be here with you. It was a great conversation. I have so many similarities that I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. Maybe one day we will.
Maybe we will. Yeah, maybe you'll come back on the Philosopher's Compass another time, and definitely we'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
And thank you again, Leonidas.
Of course.